You're listening to From the Chair, and I'm your host, Mike Hamilton. Join us each episode as we talk to athletic directors from across America. We're going to talk about topics like leadership, career development, issues of the day, and I can promise you we're going to have some fun along the way too. So sit back, listen in, and let's dive in. Let's go. All right, friends, welcome into this week's episode. I got something a little different for you this week. Normally we talk to athletic directors, but on occasion we have either talked to a legendary athletic director or maybe someone from the industry that has great bearing on what's happening on college campuses. You maybe remember we've had Tom McMillan from League One, we've had Patty Phillips from Women Leaders, and we've got some other ones lined up. And today, it's a real honor to have the executive director of the WBCA and a friend, Danielle Donehew, with me. Danielle, how are you doing?
I'm great. It's so good to see you, Mike, and excited for our conversation.
Well, I think what your work, let me say this, the career track that you've been on, and then couple that with the work that you're doing, I think that those who listen to this regularly will find it to be very helpful and entertaining and worth the time to sit back and listen. I told you I want to do a quick flyover of your career track, and then we'll kind of go back and ask some questions relevant to some stops along the way. You're a Georgia native. You played basketball at Georgia Tech. You were had a number of accolades while you were there as a student athlete. I think it's interesting that you have a bachelor's degree in engineering. We'll touch on that maybe in just a few minutes. And then you went on to graduate school at the University of Tennessee, and that's where our interaction occurred. First as a GA for Coach Summitt, and then as the director of basketball operations for a number of years there. After that, I think you had a couple stops, assistant or associate commissioner at the Big East and the American, and then were very much involved with the early stages, early launch of the WNBA's Atlanta Dream franchise in Atlanta, and had a leadership role there for quite some time as well. Obviously, now you're with the WBCA, only the third executive director in WBCA history. I think you come into this role at a time it's at a critical juncture for the future of the sport, and I know we'll talk about that as well. So did I get most of the highlights?
You did. Yeah, there was a lot there. And as you were going through it, it's just wonderful memories are coming back. And so, yeah, it's been a wonderful journey so far. And hopefully I have lots of years ahead.
Yeah. So I do, obviously I'm kind of in a little bit of an interesting position in that I was at the University of Tennessee for the time that I was. So I know what an honor it was to work alongside Pat and to be part of her staff. And I'm curious, I never have asked you this before, but you get a bachelor's degree in engineering, and then you come to the University of Tennessee in your graduate assistant role first before becoming the DOBO. I'm imagining that Pat had a lot of folks that she could choose from to be her grad assistants. And obviously I know you to be extremely bright and on top of your game. How did the connection with Coach Summitt occur to actually bring you to the University of Tennessee?
Well, that's a good question, and not everybody knows this answer. When I was a sophomore in high school, that was when recruiting started to really pick up. I was a multi-sport athlete, but I was hoping to get a scholarship to play basketball in college. And there were other student athletes on my team that wanted to do the same thing. And one standout student athlete, her name was LaShonda Stevens. She was one of the best players in the nation. And so everybody was excited about LaShonda. And luckily, she was my teammate. And as we were beginning the recruiting process, when I was a sophomore, we were both sophomores, Pat was very clear that she would be offering LaShonda an opportunity to play at Tennessee, but she would not be offering me one, that she had other people in mind. And I was so I was impressed. I was a little hurt. It stung a little bit. I was like, I'm still not as good as I can be. Wait, don't make your decision already. I'm just a sophomore. But Pat was very direct, and I really appreciated that. And I knew just from the very beginning of getting to know her, she was a wonderfully direct communicator. And she said, I think you can play in college. It just won't be for me. And I wish you great luck. And then as time went on, fortunately, LaShonda did have a scholarship at Tennessee. She played for Pat, and they won national championships. It was wonderful. I had an opportunity to play at Georgia Tech. I had an incredible collegiate experience. And during that time in the summers, I would go and work Pat's camp. I was a camp coach, and I would get to hang out with LaShonda and get to make a little money and work her camps. And that's when I got to really know Pat, and that's when she actually really got to know me. And so when I was graduating from Georgia Tech with a degree in industrial and systems engineering, my mom and I had a conversation about, oh my goodness, what do I want to do? And we really were excited. My passion certainly was sports and basketball. My forte was going to be business. And so we wondered, hey, could I make basketball my business? And so I called Pat up and I basically begged her for a position. I begged to be a graduate assistant, and she quickly said, but I mean, aren't you an engineer? Didn't you graduate with an engineering degree? And I said, well, yes, but surely that can help you. And she said, give me a few weeks. Let me think about it, and I'll give you a call back. And it was just a few weeks later, she gave me a call back and she said, hey, if you want it, I have a graduate assistant position that just opened up, and I'd love to offer it to you. And I just couldn't say yes quick enough. I was like, yes, 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 ma'am. I'm there. I'm there. You just tell me when to be there. And it was the beginning of a very special time in my life, getting to work for Pat.
No doubt about that. And she was a special lady. So I think you had the opportunity during your time as director of basketball ops to be a part of 6 Final Fours and 2 national championships while you're at Tennessee. And you know, I get asked a lot when I'm traveling around the country, Danielle, about Coach Summitt. Because obviously, folks, I didn't know I was at Tennessee for 19 years and had the chance to work alongside of her and consider that an honor. Joan Cronin and I, the former women's athletic director at Tennessee, and I talked about this on her podcast. I think that those who are of us who have worked closely with her know what a special person she was. She could be Henrietta Pat, and she could be Wall Street Pat, right? And I'm curious as to your experience with one of the greatest leaders in all of our stories, right? It's not just on the basketball court. A true leader. What you saw from her that stood out to you, what you learned from her, what do you think made her so successful for so long at such a high level?
Well, goodness, that is such an amazing question. And I could probably talk for 3 days about what made Pat Summitt special. Um, the highlights for me, if I had to boil it down, um, it was it was intense. Um, Pat had a standard that she emulated, that she expected, that was just phenomenal. It was she would outwork everybody, right? And we all were working as hard as we possibly could, and Pat would outwork everybody. But it was an expectation, and so she not only made her student athletes better, and she saw what they could be. She made her staff better, and she saw what we all could be. Um, she was one of the most effective decision makers as I reflect back on working for her than I that I have ever worked for or been around. One of the things that was really special about Pat is she wanted all of us to tell her what we really saw, whether that was the assistant coaches, what they saw in practice or on the floor when they were in games and competing. Whether it was me in terms of the way her program was running, the efficiencies of her program. Remember, I did all the planes, trains, and automobiles. I was doing, trying to get everything organized to create an environment for the team and the staff. Um, but what was so special about Pat is she did not want to be around yes people. She wanted to be around people that told her what they really saw. And then as she was making decisions and she wanted lots of information, she then would be able to make a decision very quickly and very firmly. And then you could go to the bank on it. I mean, she didn't change. It was unbelievable. She did not waver. She would pull the trigger and you knew, yep, that's what that okay. And if it had to do with me, I knew exactly what I needed to do. So, reflecting back, yeah, there was a great intensity about working for her, but it was really easy to work for her because she was really a person of her word. She was steadfast, and when she made decisions, she stood firm on them. And so that was a great learning lesson for me. And then the other learning lesson that I use to this day. It actually came from Pat's mentor, Billy Moore, was the 1976 Olympic coach. She coached at UCLA, and Billy would come in from time to time and provide counsel and encouragement to Pat, and she was around all of us. And one time Billy actually pulled me aside and she goes, Danielle, you just cannot ask Pat all those questions when you go in to meet with her. I mean, because I would have my notebook and I would have, all these questions because I would want everything to be perfect. And Billy said to me one time, and this was very early in my ops career, she said, Danielle, I want to challenge you. You only get to ask Pat 2 questions a day, period. Are you good enough? Are you smart enough? Can you organize how you serve her enough to where you only ask her 2 questions a day? And you know what? I did that for many years. And
Wow.
I think that's one of the reasons why Pat and I had such a wonderful relationship is I didn't waste her time. Once I understood what she wanted, I was very efficient. And that was one of the best business skills I could have ever learned. And now, working for over 3,500 coaches, if I'm going to talk to one of our coaches or I need to ask them something, you better believe I never ask more than 2 questions anytime I ever talk to any of our coaches. And Pat
Yeah,
and
you
Billy
can.
taught me that.
Yeah, you can learn a lot through sort of opening the door and then listening, right? So, I'll
Mm-hmm.
share one little interesting tidbit, and you might even have been aware of this because you were there during the time. Pat and I had, let's call it, an interesting discussion one time when we were doing the renovation of Thompson Bowling Arena, and those who know that Tennessee has an incredible building there on the river, 25,000 seats at one time, and all bright orange. And during the renovation process, we were adding, I don't remember, 36 suites and 250 club seats, and reducing capacity, but also taking all those orange seats out and putting in black seats. And she wanted to have a conversation with me about that, and she let it be known that she wasn't really excited about that. She did not play the "I'm Pat Summitt National Championship Coach" card, but she did let me know, hey, I'm going to hold judgment, but I don't think this is a great decision. Well, the rest of the story, right? We did the arena renovations, and it really did create a totally different environment in that building, um, structurally and visually. And to her credit, this is, again, I think this is a testimony to the kind of person she was. She actually called me up proactively after all that went down, and we were in the building for the first time. And she just said, "Hey, I want to tell you that you were right and I was wrong, and this is incredible, and I'm glad you did do it, and that you and I had the dialogue we had about it, and so she was that kind of person. I mean, I use the term humility. I mean, certainly there's this excellence and success, and there's some bravado that comes with that with some people, but I always found her to be very humble about her beginnings, which informed who she became as a coach and thus as a leader. So, sounds like you had some of that same experience.
Yeah, and I would, that is that's a topic I do remember because I was there, and Pat did talk about that. But I'll tell you, I mean, your support and your leadership over that time was really powerful, along with Joan Cronin's leadership and support, and the building did transform, and it's a beautiful place to play. It's powerful when you walk into Thompson Bowling. And one of the things I would just describe Pat. I mean, she was intense. She was very intelligent. She was diligent. All of those sorts of things. But to your point, the word I would use is approachable. She was always approachable, and some people might be afraid to talk to a legend, right? And to talk to somebody who's at the top of their craft or the sport. Um, but Pat was always approachable, and she wanted to be approachable, and she wanted to talk to people, and she wanted to participate, right? Some coaches would have said, "Oh, go do whatever you think." But no, I mean, Pat wanted to know all the details of just about everything. I mean, she really cared, and she was an incredible steward of the Tennessee women's basketball program for 38 years, and really set the standard, I think, for the women's game for all coaches. I mean, I hear today, as I'm serving our nation of coaches, so many references to Pat's example over so many years, and it really is special for those of us that got to know her personally.
Yeah. We're going to come back at the end of our conversation today and talk a little bit about the Pat Summitt Foundation, which I know you're instrumental in founding. But I want to before we go there, very sort of in a short time frame, let's talk a little bit about you. You chose to leave Tennessee and go into the conference office environment, and you were at the Big East and you were at the American. I don't know if you had aspirations at the time. Maybe you wanted to be a commissioner, and then you eventually work your way back to Atlanta, and you're on the forefront of the birth of a successful WNBA franchise in the Atlanta Dream. You were again in a leadership role there for quite some time as well. That segue from being a director of basketball operations, you're on the bench, you're on the university campus, working one of the greatest coaches of all time, arguably one of the top couple of women's basketball programs of all time, and then you go into the league office, seemingly it's in a different geographic footprint, and then you eventually turn back to I'll call it your home of Atlanta, and work in professional basketball. The learnings from that period of time, and maybe what you saw as your trajectory, because I think that if you think about it, when we start to talk about the WBCA in just a moment, stacking your career as a student athlete in the Atlantic Coast Conference, great school, then you're on the staff of an elite brand basketball program. Then you're in the league office where you're working on your media rights and scheduling and all those kinds of things. And then you return and you're in professional women's basketball. And I think all those inform what you're doing today. But I'd like your perspective of that segment of your career before we get to the WBCA role.
Okay, well, it was a fun time of my life, and I did learn a lot. And I'll just clarify. I left Tennessee um, to help start the Atlanta Dream. So that was my first step out of
I got it
Tennessee,
in reverse. I got it. Yeah.
and thankfully, that was a project that kind of fell in my lap from a sorority sister. I was a FIMU at Georgia Tech, and she was a businesswoman in Atlanta, and there was a group of business women in Atlanta that were trying to stand up a team, and so they recruited me to help them, and Pat was supportive of that. And so I was helping them while I was still at Tennessee, and then they offered me a job. And as the great mentor that Pat was, she pushed me out of the nest, and she said, "Danielle, there's nothing more I have for you, and I think you can be more. And so you can always call me." And I'll be in your corner, but I'm going to push you out of the nest, and so it was an exciting time for me to go to Atlanta. The Atlanta Dream was really exciting because I grew up in Atlanta, right? It's my hometown. We started with a blank piece of paper and built this franchise. We had great league support. We had incredible business leaders in Atlanta behind the team. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about an expansion draft, which means you start the team with players number 6 through 11 from all the other teams. So we didn't even have a starter to start the team. And the amazing thing was we were number 6 in attendance right out of the gates. And then in the second year, we were in the playoffs. And so I think we had something really special. Our head coach and general manager was Mary Nell Metters, which a lot of Tennessee people will recognize that leader, that former coach. Um, very decorated coach, an amazing mentor for me also. But the Atlanta Dream was really exciting. It was fun to build. We were changing ownership groups, and that's when the Big East came and recruited me up to Providence, Rhode Island, and the Big East was an opportunity for me, where I actually got to serve 16 teams at one time. And one of my coaches was Gino Auriemma. And so people would always ask me, "Oh my gosh, you know Pat and you know Gino, and what are they like?" And what's really amazing is they have so many similar qualities. I learned very quickly that Gino was so talented, a great businessman, and when I was serving him from the conference office, he was wonderful to deal with. He was easy for me to deal with. He always responded quickly. He cares about the game. He wanted to grow the game. He was all in to help the Big East be the best that it could be. So I had a wonderful experience with Gino and all the other coaches that were in the league. That, if you want to talk about star power at the Big East, this was Jeff Walls, Vivian Stringer, Mike Carey, Harry Peretta, Gino Auriemma, at this time, Agnes Baronato, Quentin Hillsman, uh, Kim Barnes-Arico, Terry Mitchell. I mean, we had
Wow.
just an unbelievable assortment of coaching talent, and I learned very quickly um, how special it was to try to have 16 teams all grow at the same time, right? And that was, it was powerful. And the Big East certainly was, you know founded by Dave Gavitt, and certainly the people in the conference office that followed him um, and hired me, and that I got to work with. They were incredibly talented administrators and executives, and they taught me. They taught me a lot. As we went through conference realignment, boy, that was another lesson, that people could leave, and that change is inevitable and you have to roll with the change. And we became the American, and after figuring out how to rebrand and reposition those remaining members and go out and get new members, it's amazing for me to see the changes that are happening and continuing to happen, for that matter. um, but my coaches, when I was recruited then to consider the WBCA opportunity, and this was over 9 years ago. I can't believe I've been here 9 years now.
Wow.
um, it was the coaches that were encouraging me to consider this opportunity. And when I interviewed, I had actually worked with 51 different head coaches, and now I get to serve over 3,500. And I'm so thankful for it. I'm a product of our sport. Uh, I have been encouraged and poured into by so many incredible coaches, and so it's fun for me to try to help them all be successful.
So there are, I would call it two or three things, of categories of questions I want to talk about relative to the WBCA. I want to first, you may know this, the listenership of this particular podcast is very industry specific. It's not to say that we don't have fans of other teams, that we don't have folks in leadership roles from different companies and industries from around the country, but the listenership is primarily college athletics, as you might imagine. So you're going to get the chance to speak to athletic directors, senior associate, deputy associate, all through the gamut of folks that work in college athletics. And so I have two or three very specific things I want to talk about. The first is, this is your opportunity to share. You've already mentioned that you have 3,500 coaches that you're working with. The role of the WBCA that the folks who listen to this podcast hopefully need to understand and resonate with.
Yeah, the role of the WBCA is to certainly serve our coaches and help our coaches be as good as they can be, help them be able to thrive for their careers as coaches, right? We have three kind of buckets that we work within. the first bucket, and we're doing this constantly, is providing information and education. We want our coaches to know what is going on, right? And boy, there's a lot going on right now. So just providing communication lines, providing education for so many different skills. The role of the coach continues to evolve. The pressures of what our coaches are dealing with continue to evolve, and so we want to make sure we are providing encouragement, support, education to help them be their best. A second role is to make sure we are representing the voice of the coach to all the different governing bodies of the sport. So we work very closely with the NCAA, with the WNBA, with the National High School Federation, with USA Basketball. If it's a governing body, we want to have a great relationship with them, and we want to always provide the perspective of the coach. And certainly, it's in order to help those governing bodies have the pulse of the sport and make great decisions. And we want to be helpful in helping the sport continue to evolve, and for everybody to make great decisions. The third thing that we do that has been very important over the years is we have a very extensive awards program. And the reason we have that is so that all of our awards are selected by vote of the coach. So you may realize, what a big deal to be named the coach of the year, because that means your peers, your competitors actually selected you as the best that year, right? That's huge. The Wade Trophy, that's the Heisman in women's basketball, and the Wade Trophy is the oldest and most historic Player of the Year award in our sport. Well, we that's our award. We shepherd that award. That's the award that our coaches are presenting to who they believe is the Player of the Year in Division One. But we also have Players of the Year in every membership division. Our All-Americans, right? That is a coveted award that so many student athletes hope to be an All-American one day, and our coaches decide on that. So some of those awards, you'll see they carry a great deal of weight. I'm honored to sit in a WBCA seat as I serve on the board of the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame, also on the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. Those Hall of Fames, they're looking at body of work and what people have accomplished. And so those WBCA awards are vital to separate the creme de la creme, right? The best from the best. And they're really respected because they are by vote of the coach. So the WBCA does all of that. Our role continues to evolve, and our goal certainly is to make sure that we are as helpful as we possibly can be to all the coaches.
Great. So this is 2 or 3 questions I'm just going to stack together for a minute. The growing success of women's basketball, certainly well documented over the last few decades now. But in that, having said that, there were some inequities that began to bubble to the surface during COVID, particularly relative to the women's basketball Final Four. And I think that if nothing else, at least it has brought to light, hey, this needs to be given greater attention. These women are performing at an extremely high level. There is a very a market that's very interested in the sport, and by all rights there needs to be more equitable treatment of the student athletes in these championship and other environments for that matter. So you've got I want you to address the perceived inequities and how the progress is being made with what the NCAA has done to review that. And then I would like for you to comment, if you would, there was speculation for some time relative to does the women's Final Four and the men's Final Four play on opposite weekends? Do they play the same weekend, same place, et cetera, et cetera? Your perspective on that is that has seemingly started to iron itself out. And then this notion of the NCAA breaking apart the multimedia rights or the media rights for basketball versus women's basketball versus including it in the bigger ball of multiple sports in the negotiation process. That's a lot, but I know you have opinions on that, so I'd love to hear it.
Well, I do, and I'll try to be as succinct as I can be. So the perceived inequities, um, there was a media explosion coming out of the 2021 championship for both men's and women's Division One basketball championships, right? Um, and that media explosion, I think, was largely due to different student athlete experiences. Um, and there was a response from the NCAA. There was the gender equity report done by the Kaplan Hecker Fink law firm. There was the Ed Desser media report and media evaluation that was kind of an appendix of the Kaplan report. Some of those reviews led to data and information that needed to be reviewed, and so the WBCA certainly was very interested. We wanted to be supportive of our coaches throughout this whole time period, and we also wanted to be a resource and a partner to the NCAA to help some of these things be addressed as quickly as possible. And so we wanted to help as quickly as we could. Um, I will say that there have been lots of people that have been involved. Lots of committees throughout the NCAA have looked at all these recommendations, and some very good work has been done very quickly. Within a year, we saw in Minneapolis in 2022 um, a equitable student athlete experience for men and women. We saw greater marketing and branding. We saw the women's tournament go to a 68 team field. We saw the officials have the same payments. We saw the use of March Madness for the women. All of those things were very well received and were a powerful presentation to our country and to the fans and to the student athletes and everybody on campus of the power of working together and actually providing a unified front for men and women. And so I think it was very well received. We were extremely pleased with all the work that the NCAA has done to this point. I would say that we do not believe it's finished yet. There's still more to do, certainly, but for all that was done in one year, it was amazing and quite an accomplishment. Now, you mentioned the broadcast agreement. That is a huge business opportunity that we believe could provide a couple of things. One, depending on how it's negotiated, the Desser media evaluation seemed to recommend that the women's tournament possibly could stand alone in a media agreement, as opposed to being coupled with a number of other sports as it is right now. And that the market value of the women's championship is far higher than it was being valued currently. And so that's a real opportunity in this negotiation to realize what that market value could be. We believe that there's another business opportunity that could be tied to that broadcast negotiation, and that's the unit distribution for basketball success in the tournament. Everybody is probably very familiar that on the men's side, the men's tournament provides unit distribution as teams get to participate in the men's tournament and certainly advance. And there's not one of those on the women's side. We believe there should be one, and the opportunity maybe to open up those funds could be part of this negotiation and bringing in a new pool of money from the tournament, from the women's tournament. And then that unit distribution from the WBCA's perspective, we're not necessarily asking that it be equal, but we're asking that it be meaningful. We do believe that that unit distribution is a signal to and a waterfall effect to invest in women's basketball, and also hopefully those funds could trickle down to the campus environment. And we still have lots of women's basketball coaches that are making fractions of what their male counterparts are making at some schools. And so we do believe this unit distribution could help a continued increase in investment in the sport and certainly provide even greater opportunities in the future.
Mm. Don't you think that also could perhaps have tangent effects on perceived value of women's basketball student athletes NIL?
Yes, and when when we're talking about NIL or the wild wild west as we know it right now, the numbers that I've seen, women's basketball student athletes are really knocking it out of the park in terms of their social media followings, and people are very interested in having women's basketball student athletes be influencers for their brands. So as the women's game continues um, to elevate, as more people are more aware of the incredible talent in our student athletes, I think there is even a greater recognition of the huge followings so many of them have on social media, and then certainly in their communities. So yes, I think it could absolutely increase the NIL value of many of our student athletes.
That's good stuff. All right, so let's wrap with a conversation about the Pat Summitt Foundation for a moment, because you were one of the founders of that foundation. I've heard some say that Pat even had a conversation with you about this notion at some point during um, her time after she found out what she was facing. The organization, Alzheimer's is a very real thing. I have both of my grandmothers had long-lasting effects from that before we lost them. So I've seen the hard side of that. Early onset, someone like Pat, I mean, by all measures, I mean, can you even imagine the number of games she would have continued to win, perhaps other banners she would have hung, were it not for the effect of Alzheimer's. So maybe a little bit about the genesis of the organization, what the organization is trying to do. I know it's heavily research and education focused, I think, but you clarify that if I'm wrong. And then maybe some wins that you see in the progress as you now reflect on the work that's been done over these last few years.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mike. And I remember the time well when Pat was diagnosed, and Pat was so transparent about her diagnosis with everyone. It was truly courageous and amazing. And I know many of us were just devastated, and it was a very emotional time for everybody who loved Pat, for sure. Once she was diagnosed, I did start to travel. At this time, I was at the Big East, and I was the associate commissioner for women's basketball there when Pat was diagnosed. And so I used to travel once a month to go and visit with Pat, just to be able to hear from her about what she wanted, about the concept of creating a foundation, how she wanted the foundation to work, what was important to her, all those sorts of things. I wanted to make sure that I could serve her in that moment, and we did discuss starting a foundation, a nonprofit entity that would fight in her name long after she could. Um, there were four of us in the initial conversation. It was Pat and her son Tyler, and Adam Waller and me, and we wanted to make sure that we were um, embarking on something that could happen and that Pat ultimately would be very proud of. Um, very quickly, we wanted to be surrounded with some great talent and great leaders, and we went and talked with Jim Haslam to be our first chair of the board. And Mr. Haslam was gracious and said, absolutely. We talked to Joan Cronin very fast. Joan is a force nationally and loves Pat, and has continued to be a tremendous leader for the foundation. But Pat's vision, as we were getting started, she cared about three things. One was she wanted to go after the cure, period. Pat was competitive, and she was like, somehow this thing needs to go after the cure. Number two, she wanted to serve the actual patient that was going through this. And then number three, she also wanted to support the caregivers because she was beginning to learn the incredible weight of the caregivers in caring for someone that they love that was dealing with this. The foundation was started, and that's how we launched. We launched at the beginning of her last season at the Baylor game, and she coached one more season, and then she retired. Pretty quickly afterwards, one of the strategic initiatives was to work closely with UT Hospital in the formation of the Pat Summitt Clinic. That clinic is doing great work today. Um, there are scientists there that are doing exactly what Pat wanted, going after the cure, caring for the people who need help, and helping the caregivers. And supporting the caregivers. And so, um, the foundation is something that I certainly I serve on the board now. I want to be as supportive as I can be, but I'm not in the weeds. But I certainly gave Pat my lifetime commitment to guard her legacy and her name. And my job is to just make sure whatever happens is authentic to her and to what she would have wanted. And I know she would be incredibly proud of what the Pat Summitt Foundation has accomplished to date. And I know we have many more mountains to climb and people to serve. Now, another exciting thing that the foundation is doing is giving out lots of grants and continuing to support the caregivers. And recently, for the Pat Summitt Foundation, the foundation has now started to award a number of grants, and these grants include places that are doing great work in Tennessee and in other states. And so the foundation is beginning to truly expand its footprint in hopes also, this was Pat's vision, to make sure that we're serving the full country, that it's not necessarily just East Tennessee. We wanted to start in serving East Tennessee, of course, but we wanted to make sure that it was a national impact. It's a national effort. And through our great relationships that Pat began, and also that the people at the foundation have continued, there are lots of communication lines between different clinics all over the country to try to share information and understand research and trying to make sure that we have a united effort in the continued fight against Alzheimer's.
Yeah. So just real quickly, I'm interested the role of the We Back Pat games in all this.
Yeah, We Back Pat was something actually that started at Tennessee and then grew because of so many people loving Pat and wanting to support her and her fight. It was quickly picked up by the Southeastern Conference and then nationally. And so those games are largely just awareness, showing that everyone cares and that people are still wanting um, to fight this disease. I think there are ways in which people could support the Pat Summitt Foundation. Information is on the website, certainly, patsummit.org. I'll throw that in there. But also, Pat was also very supportive of people contributing to their local community. There's great work all over the country that people are doing in fighting this terrible disease. And as our baby boomers are aging, there are more and more people that are being diagnosed, and so it will take all of us to try to make a positive impact in fighting.
Mm. Well, I do know that it affects so many lives, and so hopefully folks will go online and see what they can learn about the work of the organization. And Danielle, just real quickly for you, is it WBCA.org? Is that your
Yes, that's
website?
it.
All right.
If
Yeah,
if
because I know
if you
some.
want to learn more about the WBCA, WBCA.org. My information is on the website. I always love a good conversation with anyone who wants to learn more. And certainly for all the athletics directors and athletics administrators out there, We're here to serve your women's basketball coaches. I hope that you will entrust them with us and encourage them to be members. And certainly, we want them to have great relationships with you. And we look forward to helping them throughout their full coaching journey.
All right. This has been a great session, as I knew it would be. Lots of information here, and you shared some significant things relative to the game, and obviously with the Pat Summitt Foundation. Thanks so much for being with me, Danielle.
Well, it was always fun to see you, Mike. Great to see you.
So likewise. All right, folks, you've been listening to From the Chair. I'm your host, Mike Hamilton. A reminder again that you can watch these episodes each and every week on YouTube or throughout the year as they're in the library there. We also invite you to listen on the audio version of this podcast, available across all of your audio podcast platforms. We've done over 65 of these now, some great sessions out there, and this will be one of those that you'll want to earmark. Again, our guest, Danielle Donehew from the WBCA, and we'll see you next time.